Well, we're excited to bring on our next speaker. And again, we were talking about having these sometimes hard conversations in order to find the solutions to move us forward. And I would say, at least in my humble experience, talking with people about homelessness, that kind of a thing, it can be a very difficult conversation with lots of different trajectories. But I think a lot of us agree there's a challenge. And so I love to stay focused on that conversation and that solution.
You know, I think this, especially for Boise, I've when I was in the behavioral health world as a community engagement director in my hometown, you know, I got to experience what the mental health, the addiction, the substance abuse, trauma, you know, does to a community. And oftentimes there's a stigma around all of that. And so in Boise, the homeless situation is reaching a tipping point, I guess you could say. You know, to where it's grown so much, and now that the stimulus money is, you know, kind of coming to an end, and the rent moratoriums that we're on, you know, and then you have these skyrocketing prices and nice weather, you know, to go along with it. You're seeing a lot of people out on the streets along the Greenbelt and the river, and you know, there's this. The challenge of getting this, you know, this temporary housing, you know, or these places where these people can transition back. Like, so if you hit a lot of bumps in the road, or whatever the case may be, where you end up homeless, you know, a lot of these people, you got to realize that their parents, their brothers, their sisters, their family, their friends, you know, to a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes you just think they made bad choices, right. You know, and that's not necessarily the case. When it comes to a lot of these challenges, I guess, that we're up against.
Well, we've all made bad choices.
Yeah.
So the other thing is how many kids are impacted. I think I became way more aware because of COVID and schools shut down, and I heard about this tremendous, you know, youth homeless population here in Canyon County. And, you know, I'll be honest, it wasn't on my radar as much as I feel like it should have been, but that the pandemic brought it to the forefront. So this is happening way more than we understand, I think, too.
Well, I have friends that, you know, when I moved back here, that I thought they were, you know, doing fine, you know, and then they tell me, well, I'm living in my car. You know, and it's like, well, you know, why is that? It's like, well, I'm not going to pay, you know, $1,400 for a one-bedroom apartment. Mm-hmm. It's like, it just makes more sense for me to live in my car. You know, and that's that's a troubling statistic, because you know, it's like, if you think of families that are having to do that with kids, and you know, they have a van or an SUV or whatever the case may be, what happens if something happens to that vehicle? You know, then you end up on the streets, and then now there's you know, our next speaker is going to really, you know, talk about this from a very authoritative standpoint. She's been in these trenches for a long time, and in Boise, it's polarizing in that sense, because it's like, well, we know that we need these services, but you know, not really in my neighborhood.
Right. Somebody else can figure it out.
Yeah, somebody else can figure it out, but we're at the point now where it has to be figured out now.
Right.
You know, because what they're proposing is enough capacity to help a lot of people, but not enough capacity to help everyone.
Right.
You know, and can you help everyone? To a certain extent, we should be able to, because when you think of a community chain, you know, the homeless and the at-risk populations, those are our weakest links, and so a chain is only as strong as its weakest links. And so if we're not helping them, that's a cascading effect, you know, because it goes, you know, that builds. That's you know, it's a domino.
Right. I saw this lady's TEDx talk, super powerful, so really excited. Jodi Peterson is the executive director at the Interfaith Sanctuary. Jodi has been working with the homeless community in Boise for more than 14 years. She continues to fundraise, advocate, educate, and inspire others on the challenges faced by the homeless and the solutions that we can create together.
And so when we first started talking to Jodi, it was actually last year in October, and we were trying to get something done, you know, like for Christmas or something along those lines, and it ended up not being able to work out. But then we reconnected, this spring and said, "Hey, Jody, like I know that you're working on these things. It's critically important. How can we help?" And she's like, "Well, we just need to help spread the message. We need to put names to these faces and tell a lot of these people that they just hit a couple tough bumps in the road and they can get back on their feet. They just need a little bit of support. They need a little bit of help." Mm-hmm. And so hopefully we can help spread that message of the great work that they're doing.
Yeah, and that translates nationwide and worldwide too.
Yeah,
so it's
not
a great
it's
message.
not a Treasure Valley problem.
Right.
It's like this is a national, international, global situation that's unfolding.
That's right. So we welcome to the stage Jodi Peterson.
Hello. Welcome. I have no mask on. Sorry, this needs to get a little bit better. Can you all hear me? All good? Well, so I'm Jodi Peterson Steigers, and I am the Executive Director of Interfaith Sanctuary. And I'm here today really, I think, to catch everyone up on what a pandemic teaches a homeless shelter and what we hope we can do with the silver linings that were gained from surviving a pandemic year. So Interfaith Sanctuary was founded in 2005 as an emergency shelter. And the definition of an emergency shelter is we're going to give someone a safe place to be at night. We're going to make sure that they have a meal in the morning. They're going to kind of be on their own until we open back up at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. And that's how we started. In 2005, we were an overnight shelter. We moved into our building in 2008, and that was permanency, where we could go from being a seasonal shelter to a year-round shelter. But we were still pretty much operating on the idea, let's give them a safe place to sleep and a meal, but they're going to have to navigate the rest on their own. So fast forward to 2013, 2014, we started to really take a hard look at how we could better serve our homeless population, and it wasn't about turning them back out on the street all day, because that really, in essence, adds trauma to the whole homeless situation, and it makes it very difficult to give them the ability to gain traction, because when you're trying to navigate all day long where you're going to get your meal, where you can sit for a certain amount of time, how you're going to change a baby's diaper, very hard to focus on next steps and dreaming big and what you hope and dream for your family or for your future. And so Interfaith Sanctuary became a house of programming, and we served first families with children when we were in our building. So I'm going to back up for a minute because it's a little confusing right now. We are 2 shelters right now because of the pandemic, but as I'm talking to you right now, I'm talking about who we were when we operated in a single emergency shelter where we served 164 clients, men, women, and families with children. So the first program that we moved into the shelter was a family program. It allowed our families with children to stay in during the day. We brought early education to the children. We brought parenting classes and case management and supportive services and education on finances, budgeting, all the things that would help them be house ready, we brought directly to our shelter. And we ran that program Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday and Sunday, because we didn't have a budget yet, the families had to go back out on the street and come back in at the end of the day. And the frustration was that those 2 days actually set them back because, once again, they're trying to figure out how their babies are going to take naps, how they're going to be able to get their kids rested and fed. And so we opened up completely 7 days a week for the families with children, and we've been open for 7 days a week ever since. And that has proven to be a game changer, for sure, not just for improving the homeless story, but also for taking care of those children and allowing them to develop the way they deserve to develop, even though they don't have their own home yet. And so then the next program that we did was we worked with the city of Boise because we had a bunch of our guests who were really trying hard to get employed. We had case managers working, going online, submitting application after application, and none of our guests were really getting callbacks, and it's because they had to check some boxes that employers weren't very interested in. We needed to find a way to get these particular guests back to employment through a low barrier partnership. And so we met with the city of Boise, Parks and Rec, with Doug Holloway, and we presented to him an idea of a partnership where if they would help hire our guests into their Park and Rec program, we would provide the transportation, the nutrition, and have a case manager on site throughout their workday. And they agreed to it, and they gave us a pilot program for 30 days, and we're going into our 4th year of the work program. We've put 67 guests back to work through this program, and basically it allows them to get job history. Some of them actually advance to full-time employment with the city of Boise. Some of them actually launch to a different job. But what it allowed them to do was get back to work, manage what that mental health thing was going to feel like. So that case management support was really good in helping them to navigate that change and that expectation and the stress of being an employed person. But it also made sure that they all had their documents, they had an ID, social security card, they had to have a checking account so that they could get direct deposit. And so this really accelerated the success of this group. So we continue to do that program now. After we got that program going, then we decided to take on what we were seeing with our guests who had mental health issues. They came in every night, they got a meal, they went to sleep, they weren't engaging with our case management, and it seemed as though they were kind of caught in a vicious cycle. And so we as a staff decided, like, what would happen if we created a program that identified some of our guests that were the most chronically homeless with clearly untreated mental health, and we gave them a safe place to be, and we figured out some programming for them. So we identified 12 guests who we knew from the system, and we invited them to come into our shelter. And we basically said, here's the deal. We're going to give you 3 meals a day. We're going to let you take naps. We're going to let you watch motivational movies. We're going to do dream boards. We're going to bring you art and poetry and just kind of let you reconnect slowly, but we're not going to ask anything of you. And so we asked for 30 days, and within 2 weeks of them being able to wake up when they woke up, as opposed to be woken up, getting them their meal, letting them sit quietly in group and talk about their childhood or whatever, 2 weeks created new human beings. They calmed down, they engaged, they started to ask for things. Like suddenly they started to imagine a future and that they would like to get their ID or they'd like to try and do some med management. And that program continues today. It's a flourishing program. We've added guitar and an art collective and poetry and fitness. And basically when you allow someone to be held safely without too much pressure and you let their trauma get reduced, they will begin to take the steps towards regaining their lives. But they have to feel safe first, and they have to feel safe for more than an hour. And so that's what Project Wellbeing is. It's a safe space. And from Project Wellbeing, we found some guests who were not just dealing with mental health, with recovery issues, mental health issues, but they also were dealing with some addiction issues. And they started asking about recovery. And access to recovery for a homeless person is difficult. And so we decided to create our own in-house recovery program, which is called Project Recovery. And we do that in partnership with a behavioral agency called Recovery for Life. So they bring their counselors in, and then we have a supervisor, and we have peer mentors, people who have lived experiences that work with our guests, and an in-treatment program in our shelter. They stay with us 24/7. They have a bed. They have a special area to give them kind of safety during the day. And that program is creating sobriety during a pandemic, which is pretty remarkable. We have over 12 guests currently in the program who have hit over 100 days sober, and they've done it during a very, very difficult time. So we have certainly learned that community matters, and when you're providing shelter, you do need to provide a community as well. So those are kind of the special programs that we define ourselves by. And now I kind of want to fast forward you to when the pandemic hit. So we're going along, we're doing all these programs, we're finding great solutions, we're figuring out ways to get people's IDs back, we're getting people back to work. And then the pandemic hits, and suddenly there's this very dangerous situation where we're serving 164 different people inside an open dorm building where there's seniors, there's chronically ill, there's newborn babies, there's all kinds of stuff. And we realized that there was no way we could safely serve a full house and be able to keep people safe and alive. So we went to the city of Boise and we asked for help. And we said, is there any way you could help us move our families with children and our seniors and most medically fragile to a hotel? And we'll move all of our staffing and our programming to that hotel. And FEMA had funding. And so we were, in fact, able to move that population over to a hotel. So now we're running 2 different shelters. We're running Interfaith Sanctuary, which is the emergency shelter for single men and women. We could serve 140 guests. And then at the hotel shelter, we're serving 100 guests that are families with children, seniors, and chronically ill. And then there was this thing where suddenly we were wondering, what happens if someone who's homeless tests positive for COVID? Where do they go? How are they going to stay safe? And how are we not going to see an outbreak in our community? And so the city of Boise partnered with us again, and they rented another hotel, and our staff created COVID positive hotel. So anybody who was homeless, from here to Nampa, we actually took care of any homeless anywhere because it was hard to get these programs started. They came to a hotel where our staff was, and they stayed until they were safely quarantined and were effectively safe to go back into the community. We provided their nutrition, case management, and we had a partnership with Family Medicine of Idaho where they came and did the medical rounding. So we weren't taking on something that we were not trained to do. And if anyone got too sick, if they had to be moved back to the hospital, we had assistance with that. And then the final thing that was asked of us is that all the churches shut down, the library shut down, our day shelter in Boise shut down, Corpus Christi. It was just impossible to get volunteers to come in to serve the homeless community. And so as it got colder, there was no place for the guests to go during the day. Not just people who stayed at our shelter, but also the Boise Rescue Mission and anyone who's unsheltered. They're used to being able to utilize certain services during the day, and those were just gone. And so we again partnered with the city of Boise. They leased a building for us in downtown Boise that was huge. It was the old Foothills Arts and Science building, big enough to do safe distancing. And so we created a day shelter called the Warming Shelter. And our staff, we moved staff in there where we had case management, support groups. We did a recovery group there. We had a thrift shop for free donations for people to get clothes if they needed it. We provided breakfast, lunch, coffee, snacks. We had a movie room, and we had a family area for families with children who were unsheltered but needed someplace to be during the day. And we were able to serve about 180 guests daily, Monday through Sunday, in partnership with Corpus Christi. So if you count it, that's the emergency shelter for single men and women, 140. The hotel shelter, families with children and seniors and medically fragile, another 100. COVID hotel, it could have been anything from 1 to 40, depending on where we were at with the outbreaks. And then the warming center, which we served about 180 people a day, 7 days a week. And that was all under the umbrella of Little Interfaith Sanctuary Homeless Shelter. And so it was a lot. We were called on to do a lot, but you know what? We learned so much. And I kind of call it a time of silver linings, because as scary as it was, we actually were given a chance to serve the best way possible. Moving families with children and seniors and medically fragile into their own hotel rooms, being able to reduce trauma, reduce exposure. Seniors could suddenly be in place all day long. They didn't have to go find a place to go. People who were chronically ill, we could bring home health to, because in an open shelter, HIPAA won't allow that kind of care because of privacy. We had 3 people that we were able to actually bring hospice to, and they were able to gracefully end their life with love and community and care and pain-free. And we had a permanent preschool for our kids at our other shelter. We turned the dining room and the classroom into the preschool, that turned into the yoga room, that turned into the music room, because we just don't have a lot of space there. And so during this time, we saw who we could be. We saw that it's not really about emergency shelter. It's about a temporary home for people who don't have homes, and they deserve to live as comfortably as possible, because the more we look at this, it's not really their fault. The system is really letting them down right now. I don't know what's going on across the country, but where's the affordable housing? Where's the equity and the equality and how we're looking to design cities? Where's the neighbors welcoming us with open arms to build structures, to house people and get them off the street? We're a little behind, I think, and so now we're going to do some catch up, right? So based on what we saw, what we learned, how we got to serve, we made a big shift, and we decided, because we had thought for the last 3 years, we're busting out of this 10,000 square foot warehouse, we need a bigger home. And so we started looking at possible locations, and it just so turned out that the Salvation Army thrift shop on State Street came up, well, it's been up for sale, but it had a price reduction, which a commercial real estate agent got flagged and said, you might be able to afford this building. And it was 33,000 square feet and sits on just under 2 acres of land, right on a bus line, right off the Greenbelt, access to everything, walkable. So we went to go look at it. It was perfect. And so that's where this story turned to Reimagining Shelter. And we bought the building. We excitedly worked with an architect and a builder and started this process of building a shelter that would bring all of our programming under one roof. Each of those programs would have their own dedicated space. We would have a medical dorm with a partnership with Terry Riley and Family Medicine Residency of Idaho, so that our seniors and our chronically sick would actually have care, along with all of our other guests having access to clinic and maintenance and, the regular kinds of incidents that you see in a shelter often tends towards untreated diabetes, issues with sugar level, wound care, things like that. And having the access to medical at all times will reduce the system's pressure for emergency medicine. And so that's all being built into this project. And also hospice rooms, 2 hospice rooms, to make sure that if there is someone in our population that's there, we want to be there for them. And then a separate family building where families have their own units, and there's a permanent preschool, a teen room, a computer room, washing and dryers. There's the entire main floor has community rooms, and it's got a day center. So what we learned from the warming center, we're creating in the day center. So any guest who stays at this new shelter can be there 24/7. There's no, hey, it's 7 a.m., everyone get out. There's a dining room, there's a commercial kitchen, there's a park, there's a community garden, there's a playground. And basically it is a safe place to hold you until we can find you the access that you need to get back into housing. And so we put our conditional use permit in, and now we've been asked to pause. The city of Boise has decided that based on the opposition that we're hearing from the neighborhood, that we might need to have a task force to determine if this is the right project, if this is the right location. And so we're taking an 8-week pause as of last Thursday, and we're going to have some experts take a look at what we feel like we've learned up close and personal, and they'll evaluate and see if we're on track for what we think our homeless population needs right now, and if, in fact, State Street is appropriate, because there's some neighbors who don't agree. And so we're learning through the process, but I think that us going through this process, us taking these steps, us learning how to answer the hard questions and look into the face of opposition is part of our responsibility to help other people do it across the country, because this is the same story city to city. And so I think we've taken a deep breath and we're like, we're going to ride this out. We're going to learn everything we can. We're going to do this right for our people and our community. And then we're going to go help other people do it too, because our problem's not near as big as other people's problems. And we do have an innovative and collaborative community that will work with us. We just have to get past the fear and the opposition. So that's our story of the Reimagined shelter. And I wanted to be able to take time to answer questions, because we get a lot of questions right now, and there's a lot of misunderstanding. So if anyone would like to ask some questions right now, I'd be honored to answer them.
So I think we got a question up here from one of our Boise State students.
Hello, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
My question is, in your time working with the homeless population and with people who are really still buying into the stigma behind homelessness, what have you found is the best way to talk to people who are just scared?
So if the question is the people who are scared of our homeless, is
Yes.
that who we're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, what we normally try to do is invite them into our shelter to meet our guests and to kind of step into a better understanding of the different stories that make up a homeless population. It's very dangerous when you imagine that the one person you saw out on the street who was very drunk represents every single homeless person that ever existed. And that's the problem, is that there's not that much homelessness in Idaho or Boise. And so your story is very narrow. And I think you don't become fascinated by it until it might be moving into your neighborhood. And so we have a lot of catching up to do to help with that fear. But we will sit and talk to anyone and introduce anyone to our guests, because they're all participating in some sort of programming. They're all writing their stories right now because they want to find a way to tell their stories over the noise of the opposition. They feel very misrepresented. And so, I mean, with anything, if there's fear, you have to get educated. And there's no better way to get educated than to meet the people that you wonder about, right?
Thank you.
Did that help? You're like God, because you're the light. I can't see your face at all, so I can't even tell if that was a good answer for you.
Can you kind of touch on what has happened pre-pandemic with the homeless situation as opposed to today? Like what you're dealing with? I think we talked about it just a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, what we anticipated is what we're seeing. You know, obviously when the pandemic hit and so much business got shut down and people were taken out of employment, at the same time, strangely, our property values spiked and the demand to live here increased by 300%. And so those people who were struggling to just hang on, now they're getting 30-day notices with increases in their rent. And so now what's happening is they're ending up in our shelter, and they've never been homeless before. So you're looking at very scared people who never imagined that they would have to come to our shelter. They're coming to our shelter and they're learning the system, and it's really scary for them. But the fact is, when you get a 30-day notice that your rent's gonna increase, you're not gonna find something that's gonna match your rent. You're not gonna find a place to move in the city of Boise or any really area right now. And so basically when someone gets that note, they're on their way to living in their car, going to live with family, living couch to couch, or they're gonna come to a shelter and they're gonna ask for help, and we're gonna try and figure out a way to get access back for them as well. So we're not getting anyone really moved out right now because there's no access, and now we're getting new people moved in. And so I think you can see how that's gonna work out. And so part of the design of the shelter is, you know, when people come to a shelter now, they'll be with us for about a year. It used to be 30 days.
Wow, that's a tremendous difference almost uncomprehendable in a sense that somebody has to, they're having to live there for a year in order to get them back on their feet, or even save up enough money, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how much the opposition is coming from, not so much being opposed to being around people they didn't really know, but a fear that the shelter is going to reduce property values, given that everybody's in this crazed state of getting as much money as they can for their property.
Yeah, that has definitely been probably the top 3 things that we hear are reduction in property values, increase in crime, and, not in they just prefer that this particular population not be in their neighborhood. So, it's funny trying to gather the data to help support why a shelter program like our shelter will certainly not increase crime or reduce property taxes, because they have a safe place to be all day. Crime comes from having no place to be. Crime comes from having no support. When you are desperate, you take desperate measures. Like the way that shelters are being asked to kind of recreate themselves, there's a model called housing first. And that means if someone's out on the street, the first thing we want to do is provide them shelter, get them stable, and then wrap services around them. And so this was really popular because it was everyone deserved housing no matter where you're at in your recovery. It doesn't matter, we're going to get you in shelter first. And so everyone embraced this, and they started saying, yeah, not shelter. Shelters aren't good. Let's do housing first. But there's no housing. And so now we have to have a new discussion. What do you do if shelter first is the most important thing, but there's no way to create that housing first? So we've been asked, as emergency shelters, redefine yourself. Now you need to take the housing first approach. You need to create programming that allows people to come in, that they can stay, that they have access, that it's low barrier. You don't have to be clean and sober. We don't care your race, religion, sexual orientation. We're already low barrier. That was our mission, and that's how we were formed. But they're asking more shelters to allow more people to be able to come off the street into their shelters. And so we're taking that and leading with it in Boise, because we are the shelter that can do it. We're already low barrier. We want to serve in a beautiful way. And so this is our chance to do it. And I think it's a model that will move across the country. And I think Boise is going to be so proud of having this kind of community. And if I could just get past that wall of fear and hate, I think these neighbors will see that it's a benefit to be able to do this in our little town.
Good for you. Excellent job.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I would ask, what is your need over capacity, I guess you could say? Are you able to take in everyone that's coming to you right now?
No. That's a really good question, because part of the reason for the new building is also to try and increase capacity. So before the pandemic, we were full at 164 guests in our building, and 40 of those were families with children plus cribs, and then the rest were single adults, because it's a building that's divided, and so we could only have 40 beds for families. When we became the 2 shelters, we can do 140 men and women, and then we have 100 guests at the hotel. And of that, 38 of those are children, and then the rest are parents and singles that are either senior or medically fragile. So if tomorrow the pandemic funding ended, we care for 240 people right now. So if the hotel closed, we could only move 64 people in. And so we now have 100 people that are out on the street. And so the idea was to time this building, because we know that we can keep FEMA and CARES funding for 12 to 18 months. And so the idea is to keep them in place and move them to the new building so that we can not break services at all.
And I don't know, I had to step out for a minute. Is the permitting on your new building is there a hold on that right now?
We're calling it a pause.
Pause, okay.
We're pausing, and the mayor has asked that she be allowed to have the city of Boise create a task force of people from the hospital system, the school district, Catch, who actually helps maintain the waiting lists for housing, and someone from the neighborhoods, I believe a couple of guests who actually represent the homeless population. We will have two representatives from Interfaith Sanctuary, and then there'll be a city council person. That is the planned approach for the task force, and that task force is supposed to meet for the next 8 weeks. They'll do a deep dive and really try and understand what our population looks like right now, what the need is, and is this the right shelter and the right building? After 8 weeks, they'll present to the mayor and city council to advise them, we feel like you should move forward with this plan, and then our conditional use permit will go right back in and not miss a beat. If it's determined that they're like, that's a whole nother story. That means that the city is going to try and acquire a different property for us. We don't know what that looks like. So I don't know what that story looks like.
Yeah.
But my hope is that in those 8 weeks, the task force learns how much collaboration and partnership we've done to create this shelter, and that it is the right project in the right location.
And critically important.
Would it be possible to ask the community if anybody would open their home up to families, and then maybe not long-term, but while there's a need? And not just Boise specific, maybe the whole area. Because there are people that are compassionate and they would, possibly do something like that and not ask for anything back.
Yeah, no, I do think that there's a very willing community. I see it all the time. I don't know that Interfaith Sanctuary would want to organize that, because what if? We take our guests in, we have a behavioral code, we have a well-trained staff, we have stuff that happens, and because of our experience and things, we do have a skill set that allows us to, I think, do our work very well. But what if I asked a family to take someone in without me really being able to, do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I believe there would have to be a process of
Yeah.
somewhat of a screening, of course, and
Yeah.
but
I believe in that modeling mentorship. I believe that when there's people who really want to help lift people up, that's sometimes the greatest way in which someone will be able to move forward. So I'm all for it. I'm all for boarding houses again.
yes,
I'm all for tiny houses.
yes.
I believe everything is possible, and I think we should try everything, because I think we have no excuse to let people be homeless year after year. Our waiting list at Catch is 2 to 4 years. There's 800 people on that coordinated entry list that is queued, and then you have to wait for the property managers to accept the vouchers. It's like, we got to get better at this. We have to be able to figure out a way to get that housing up and look at every different kind that we can do. And in the meantime, we have to shelter people in the safest way possible and treat them with the greatest dignity possible, so there's not more damage for their experience. Because I'm sorry, we're not killing it when it comes to livable wages and affordable, we're just not. We need to get better. And so.
Another thought, I live in Arizona, and the RV population is huge.
Yeah.
And at least in the summer, while the weather is decent, to have a little area of, at least it'd be better than sleeping, in the elements or
No,
on the ground.
I agree. And for the amount of RV capabilities we have, and trailer parks and stuff like that, everything's at capacity. You can't get any space anywhere, and it's very hard to get it to be licensed new. But yeah, you're right, all of this should be done.
Right.
And, we have to be fierce advocates and boldly say these things out loud. And, actually, I'm going to proudly announce that I have a new staff member who's actually sitting right there. Her name's Erin Sheridan. She was a reporter for Idaho Press, and she is working for me now, and we have a homeless paper called Word on the Street. And the idea is to work with our guests and to help uncover the real stories of homelessness and also what can we do better. And so Erin is an investigative reporter, and she's going to work with us to look at all of those ideas and figure out how do we get past the red tape.
One more, I saw a piece a couple years ago, and it was in Denmark. They are doing what they call communal living.
Yeah.
And families, elderly, children, they're all living in
Yeah.
the same, where they have a common area. And of course, you think, well, is that a assisted living, a nursing home? Which is, and I thought, why not?
Yeah.
They talk about nursing homes that have a daycare in them now. So the young and the elderly
Yeah.
interact, and it helps them both.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, one of the models that I really believe in is what the guests have been trying to teach me forever, because our guests actually sit on kind of focus groups, and they've helped us with every design element of our shelter, with our creation of our newspaper. They're very much guiders of how we do our work, because who knows better than them? And they keep saying this, and I know, and I've met with developers, and I'm going to say it out loud to you. They don't want an apartment. They don't need a full kitchen. They need a room with a door and a lock. They'll share space. They'll share common ground. They actually like community. So instead of building these huge affordable housing complexes where everyone has their own same stuff, stop it. Build dorm rooms, build community rooms, share kitchens, have a communal garden. That's what they want. That's why sometimes they self-sabotage back to us, is that when you get moved into a scattered site, single apartment, you're alone. And you don't want to be alone. You just want it to have a door.
Yes.
And so, yes, that's where I think we need to innovate instead of just doing the same thing over and over again.
Absolutely. And in regards to having just your own room, the group home situation for the mentally ill is probably a better option, because they're not able to be
sure.
by themselves, and it's not a good thing for them.
Agreed. We're on the same page.
Okay, any last questions? I think that was great. Thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you.
your
Thank you so
experiences,
much.
Jody.